Frankie Luvu isn't the most well-known Washington Commanders linebacker on a national stage, but he might just be the most Joe Witt linebacker on the roster in Washington. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's family of sites. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you for coming through today. Every dayers, I greatly appreciate you for coming through every single day. Welcome back. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this episode. On this episode, we're going to dive into the latest social media stunt by 49ers receiver Brandon Aiyuk and evaluate its impact or potential impact and involvement of Washington Commanders quarterback Jayden Daniels, if there is one. But first, we're going to dive into the linebacker position, continuing our discussions position group by position group of what we think we know, what we might know, what we want to expect, or what we could expect from each position group this season in Washington. We're going to talk about why Frankie Luvu may be the most important on-field player in the linebacker room. If you want to discuss that or anything else in this episode or anything else Washington Commanders related, or if you have questions, all you got to do is shoot me a text message. Do that by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Sign up today. And from there, you can text me whatever your heart desires, and I will text you my responses, answers, bonus content, occasionally some inside information. And you'll also get live text during practices, games, press conferences, and many more situations. No hashtags, no downloads, no apps, just your phone, my phone. We can communicate beyond the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Bobby Wagner is a Hall of Fame linebacker. No doubt about that. He is the marquee player in the free agent class for the Washington Commanders in 2024. He is the most established linebacker on the roster and the most important linebacker in the locker room, maybe the most important leader in the locker room this season. But it's Frankie Luvu that is the most Joe Witt-esque linebacker in Washington these days. And because of that, he could very well be the catalyst to Joe Witt Jr. really getting his defense humming in his first year as defense coordinator of the Washington Commanders. So kicking that off to talk about our linebacker discussion, and just like we did with a lot of the other position groups, we're going to talk about how we evaluate the position group. And again, everybody does it a little bit differently. Everybody's got their method, their style. So as you follow people, Daniel Jeremiah's of the world, as you hear from other former, current scouts, GMs, all this stuff, don't be surprised if there's little nuances here and there. But by and large, the important characteristics you're looking for in an off-ball linebacker, right? It's important to delineate that too, because outside linebackers, defensive ends, we talked about them in our edge episode. If you missed that, it's the episode before this one. Go ahead and go back and catch that. But now we're talking about the off-ball linebackers, the guys who sometimes are on the line of scrimmage, sir, but most part, usually about 5 to 8 yards off the line of scrimmage, maybe 4 to 6 yards off the line of scrimmage, tend to be lined up between the tackles or between the tight ends if they're in line tight ends, things like that, right? And for these off-ball linebackers, you're looking for size, speed, tackling ability, coverage ability, and instinct. So a little bit of everything, right? Because that's where they're in the middle of the field. They're in the middle of the defense, so they need to be able to do a little bit of everything. So when we're talking about size, generally speaking, and again, there's outliers to every bracket of evaluations, but generally speaking, you want a guy who's about 5'10" to 6'5", somewhere in that range. So there's about a 7-inch window there that you want your guy to be in, and you want to be about 215, 255 pounds. When we're talking speed, we're looking for agility, change of direction, pursuit speed, acceleration, tackling. You're talking about form, discipline, toughness, and the angles that they take in trying to pursue the tackle. Coverage, again, angles incredibly important. Fluidity in their hips and their feet, and ball skills, instincts, vision, anticipation, football IQ are the three things that really kind of blend in to give what we think is instinct. So when you talk about racking and stacking these linebackers, right, I think Bobby Wagner, again, comes in as kind of your number one guy. He's the most known. He's the most nationally recognized, future Hall of Famer for a reason, all those things. So he's kind of your number one overall guy. Frankie Luvu is number two in my book. Jamin Davis is third. From there, we get to a group of guys that we really have very limited evaluation on. And some of these guys like Jordan McGee, we really only have college evaluation, right? We've seen him in rookie minicamp, OTAs minicamp, and certainly we've been able to peel some things from that as far as evaluation goes, but no pads, no hitting, no live defense. So it's still very limited and what we can actually take away from some of these guys. So like Jordan McGee, Anthony Pittman, who there's just not a lot of tape on, even from his previous stop in the NFL in Indianapolis. Bo Bauer, who's been out of Notre Dame for a little bit now, but again, not a lot of NFL tape on him. Keandre Jones, Michael Walker, who's listed as an outside linebacker, but we're going to kind of lump him in here with the off-ball linebackers. Not really sure where they're going to use him or if he's even going to make the roster. So it's kind of hard again to pinpoint where he's going to be used. But you figure they brought him in for a reason, right? So there's certainly going to be an opportunity there. So that's kind of the overall rankings. And again, like Bauer, Jones, Walker, like those three specifically are really kind of hard to rack and stack. So there's kind of a default ordering for them. So if you know one of those guys, if you're a real big fan of one of those guys, don't take it too hardly or too harsh if they're maybe a little bit lower than you want. We got plenty of time to see more of them. We're going to see more of them in a Washington context, and that's really where the biggest value is going to come from. But when we break down the actual attributes and characteristics of these linebackers and kind of what you want from them, when you look at guys by size is it's really a little bit difficult to give a personal opinion on, right? There's just kind of this window of guys you want. So who kind of fits the window the best, right? Frankie Luvu to me is best as far as prototypical off-ball linebacker size is concerned for this roster, right? Jamin Davis comes in right after him, Jordan McGee, Anthony Pittman, Keandre Jones. Then you have Bobby Wagner. And what's really interesting is there, so he's a shorter guy, but he's also a stockier guy. So he's kind of on each end of the spectrum. He's a little bit on the heavier end of your off-ball linebacker, but he's also on your shorter end of an off-ball linebacker, which explains why coming out of college maybe he wasn't expected to be the Hall of Famer that he's turned into. Bo Bauer comes after that. When we look at speed, and for conversation's sake, since Michael Walker is listed as an outside linebacker, we're kind of just gonna stick to the pure off-ball linebackers here. Again, more to follow evaluating Walker as training camp preseason gets rolling. So we're looking at speed. I think Frankie Luvu right off the bat, right, kind of jumps off the page, is probably the fastest linebacker. Jamin Davis, certainly no slouch in the speed department either, but I do give the nod, I think, to Frankie Luvu, just watch him play speed. And again, some of that's going to be hopefully addressed by Jamin Davis being in a new scheme with a new defensive coordinator. Jordan McGee looks to have the next, the third most kind of speed on the roster. Again, most of that's coming off of college tape and things like that. Not really so much focus on his 40 time, more so looking at the play speed. Jordan McGee certainly seems to have a little bit of that. Bobby Wagner comes in after that. Again, not, Bobby's career is not the physically gifted type. It's the mentally gifted type, which we'll get here in a minute. Anthony Pittman. And then again, Keandre Jones, Bo Bauer, kind of hard to evaluate them fully right now. Tackling, Bobby Wagner. This is where his football IQ, his intelligence, his veteran savvy, and all these things start to come into play. Bobby Wagner, best tackler on the team. Frankie Luvu, I put after that. Jamin Davis, then Anthony Pittman, and again, Jordan McGee, the rookie out of Temple. I could go off the Temple tape. I don't want to do that. This is the NFL. It's a completely different game. So we're going to kind of wait until we get some of that tape. Bo Bauer, Keandre Jones, rounding out the group of guys that's really kind of hard to evaluate at this point. Coverage, Bobby Wagner, Frankie Luvu, Anthony Pittman, then Jamin Davis, and then again, Jordan McGee, Keandre Jones, Bo Bauer in the incomplete evaluation portion of this. Instincts, Bobby Wagner's number one there, Frankie Luvu, Jamin Davis, and then Anthony Pittman, followed by those other three guys. So you kind of look at it, you look at the physicality of it, right? Your size and your speed. Bobby Wagner a little bit, undermanned, a little bit underutilized, or not underutilized, but a little underdog in that type of a situation, right? But then you look at his tackling ability. How much of that is based off his football IQ? The instincts are off the charts, so he's number one there. And then his coverage ability, again, because of the football IQ and just kind of knowing how to read opposing offenses, how to position himself, how to be in the right place to make the right play. And that's why Bobby Wagner has carved out a Hall of Fame career. So Frankie Luvu, Jamin Davis, guys who arguably have the better physical intangibles, the better athleticism, the better measurements for what you want in an NFL off-ball linebacker. If they can pull some of that football IQ savvy, get those instincts from Bobby Wagner a little bit, learn how to marry the intelligent side of the ball with the physical side of the ball, then that's where their careers could potentially take off. And again, Jordan McGee certainly could learn from a guy like that, Anthony Pittman as well. So that's why Bobby Wagner, most important player on the team as far as leadership, potential, growth, all that stuff is concerned. But Frankie Luvu, like I said before, is the most important player as far as Joe Witz Jr.'s scheme is concerned. We'll dive into that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. That's why we're here talking during the quote-unquote dead period of the NFL season. But I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the Major League Base, or as the NHL rather, and the NBA playoffs start to wind down, we get fewer games. Is all we got left right now. Major League Baseball, which is fine. but it's just not as much sports as we want. And sports just simply don't sport as much as we want them to this time of year. But FanDuel lets me keep going with the sports whenever I want them to. All I got to do is open up the FanDuel app, dream up any bet that I can come up with whenever I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is going to hook me up. It's going to hook you up. It's going to hook everybody up with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. On Monday, new customers got $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And returning customers like me got a 30% Major League Baseball same game parlay profit boost. And then there's Dinger Tuesdays, which are simply place a pre-live straight up to hit a home run bet on any game happening on July 9th, Tuesday. And you'll get bonus bets for every home run in that game between those two teams. So head over to FanDuel.com, start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, first view today and every day. Every dayers come back tomorrow. I got Alex Akinbulu, Washington Commanders offensive tackle, one of my favorite players that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, being on the Commanders beat, coming into my third year. Haven't had Alex on the show as a sit-down guest. We've had him on the practice field, things like that. He's one of the guys, I talk to him pretty much every day that we're out there in Ashburn if I have the opportunity, just catching up, just seeing how he's doing, things like that. So really excited to bring him onto the show. Hopefully you guys are excited to get to know him a little bit more. In the meantime, if you need more sports coverage, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel available for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories in sports. You can't miss analysis, opinions, news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, featuring the hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Continuing now with our talk about the linebacker position, we kind of already broke down the main overall kind of skill set that you're evaluating when we're talking about off-ball linebackers, right? Size, speed, tackling, coverage ability, instincts. And of course, instincts, when you're talking about instincts, really, it almost looks like the guy just knows where to go, but really it's the vision, it's the anticipation, it's the football IQ, all on display in one pure package. People used to say, luck is just when preparation meets opportunity. Instincts is when knowledge and preparation meets opportunity on a football field, right? It's kind of how you can shape that. So when we rack and stack all of the linebackers, right? Bobby Wagner comes out number one, Frankie Luvu number two, and then so on. But when you look at Joe Witt Jr., the defense coordinator for the Washington Commanders, his first opportunity to be a full-fledged defense coordinator in the National Football League, an opportunity that he told us earlier this offseason he's been waiting for since 2015. He's felt like he's been ready for nearly a decade to do this job. He's now getting the opportunity to actually do the job. Bobby Wagner is certainly going to be the name. He's going to be the veteran he leans on the most and all that stuff. But I think when you look at the primary rotational linebackers that this team is probably going to use, I'm looking at Bobby Wagner, Frankie Luvu, and then Jamin Davis being the top three linebackers going to be used by this Joe Witt Jr. scheme. Now, Jamin obviously is going to get some edge reps. So whether PFF calls them linebacker reps and all that stuff, that's more on the nuanced part of the conversation. But bottom line is you've got three off-ball linebackers. Those three are going to be the most used right now, in my opinion, just from what we've seen so far. I do think that Jordan McGee, the rookie out of Temple, can make the case for being the fourth linebacker, challenging for some third linebacker reps if he does well enough in camp and preseason. And maybe McGee will be that third linebacker in the off-ball rotation while Jamin Davis is on the edge. So if Jamin goes there, basically full time, then Jordan McGee maybe steps up to that third linebacker role. But I think Frankie Luvu is really the linebacker that's going to make Joe Witt Jr.'s scheme hum. If Joe Witt Jr. has the opportunity, and if he's able to do what a lot of people hope he can do, and that is turn the Washington Commanders defense around from one of the worst in the league last year to one of the best in the league this year, I think Frankie Luvu is really going to be a big catalyst for that. And the reason I come up with that is just looking at his history, right? So in 2023, his last year as the Dallas Cowboys defensive pass game coordinator, secondary coach, along with Dan Quinn, who was, of course, their defense coordinator, now the Commanders head coach. In 2023, their last season in Dallas together, linebacker Damone Clark had the most pass rush reps of any linebacker in Dallas. Now, that being said, he only had 51 of them. That ranked 43rd among all off-ball linebackers. However, Leighton Vander Esch, who only played 5 games due to injury, had 31 of them in those 5 games. That ranked 69th overall, right? But he only played 5 games. That's a pace of 105 for the season. So that would have ranked him 9th in the National Football League. So clearly, the Dallas Cowboys under Dan Quinn as coordinator, Joe Witt Jr. as defense pass game coordinator, secondary coach. Obviously, the Cowboys just staff in general, their style was to use their linebackers to blitz as pretty much as possible, right? They identified Leighton Vander Esch as their guy who's going to be their blitzing off-ball linebacker. Unfortunately, he gets hurt, And once he gets hurt, they do replace him as a blitzer with Damone Clark. He comes in, he gets, some pass rush reps and all that. That's all that stuff, but certainly not using him to the level that they were going to use Leighton Vander Esch. And that's actually a positive thing when you listen to this coaching staff talk about we're going to scheme to our players' strengths. Well, Leighton Vander Esch, we really liked him as a pass rusher, so we pass rushed him 31 times in 5 games, really less than 5 games because he got hurt in the 5th game, right? And then when we lose him, we don't just say, hey, Damone, you're going to be Leighton Vander Esch now. Go out there and blitz 100 times. No, we say, you know what? Damone Clark, not as good of a pass rusher from the off-ball linebacker position. So we're only going to ask him to do it 51 times in the totality of the regular season. So it shows you that your coaching staff means what they say when they say we're going to coach to our players' strengths, not just try to tell them, hey, here's what we want you to do, fit the box, whether you like it or not. So that's actually a positive sign. But when you bleed that over to the Washington Commanders, without Vander Esch having that full season, the guy who finished 9th in the NFL in pass rush reps from the off-ball linebacker position, Frankie Luvu with the Carolina Panthers last year, had 104 of them. So Vander Esch for the Cowboys was on pace for 105. Frankie Luvu had 104. So you literally have a linebacker who pass rushed as much as the Cowboys on with Joe and Dan Quinn wanted to pass rush this linebacker who ended up getting hurt. Well, now that staff that was in Dallas, now in Washington, has the linebacker that was in Carolina doing what they wanted to do in Dallas there. Now, Vander Esch and Frankie Luvu, very different in dynamics. Vander Esch is significantly bigger. I would say Frankie Luvu is significantly more athletic and faster. Now, Witt/Quinn, they're willing to blitz linebackers when they have one capable. So if Frankie Luvu proves to them that he fits their scheme in that mold, the way they say that on tape, the way it certainly looks on tape, he should get a good amount of pass rush reps. However, if he doesn't prove it, or if he gets hurt, knock on wood, that doesn't happen, then it could significantly shift where the extra rushers come from. Because to me, when you look at just the measurables, Bo Bauer is the closest physical comp to Leighton Vander Esch, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're just going to look for the most Leighton Vander Esch-esque or type of linebacker and say, okay, you go out there and go blitz. Because when you look at their history, and again, we're looking more at Joe Witt Jr. here, 2020, defensive pass game coordinator, again, secondary coach with the Atlanta Falcons. In 2020, Deion Jones was that team's highest blitzing linebacker. He's smaller than Frankie Luvu, certainly smaller than Leighton Vander Esch, but more Frankie Luvu than he is Leighton Vander Esch. 2019 with the Browns, Joe Witt Jr. was on that defensive staff. Mac Wilson Sr. was the most blitzing linebacker in Cleveland. Again, a smaller type linebacker. 2018, Witt's last year with the Green Bay Packers. Blake Martinez, again, more Luvu-like than Vander Esch. So even though Leighton Vander Esch last year with the Dallas Cowboys was the high blitz volume linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys, doesn't look like Frankie Luvu, looks a little bit more like a Bo Bauer. If you look at the history of Joe Witt Jr., this the stops he's been in, the systems he's played or coached in, and all those things, the Frankie Luvu type linebacker is actually the one they like to use as the blitzer more. So that's why I think Frankie Luvu really ties the aggressive nature of this defensive scheme under Joe Witt Jr. together the most, even though if you just look immediately at the Dallas Cowboys history, you might say, bro, Damone Clark has Frankie Luvu dimensions, barely blitzed at all. Leighton Vander Esch does not have Frankie Luvu dimensions, but blitzed even more. He's the one-off. He's the anomaly, not the trend. The trend is actually the smaller, more athletic linebacker getting more of the pass rush reps. So I expect that to come from Frankie Luvu, which means, again, he's the guy that ties together the Joe Witt Jr. scheme. Bobby Wagner is the GOAT. He's the king. He's the legend. He's the mentor. He's the wizard. He's the whatever you want to call him. But Frankie Luvu, and at the end of the day, is going to be the guy that puts the coals into the fire and make sure that this thing is firing on all cylinders. Jordan McGee has a lot of excitement about him. Certainly stood out during OTAs, mandatory minicamp, all those things. Only had 32 pass rush reps at Temple last year. Doesn't mean that he can't do it. We see all the time college teams don't use guys in ways that they necessarily can. They go to the NFL, they use in a way that the college system never used them in. And oftentimes those fans are going, look what we had over here. We never used them like this. What's going on? It just is what it is. So that being said, until he proves that he can do it, I do expect Luvu from the off-ball linebacker position to have the most pass rush reps. Jamin Davis coming off the edge, obviously, is going to get some pass rush reps as well. So that's our deep dive into the linebacker position. We're going to turn the page back over to the offense real quick to wrap up this episode and ask the question. Well, actually, we're going to answer the question. Is Brandon Aiyuk putting Jayden Daniels in a jeopardized situation with all the social media activity? My answer is no. But there are some people who say yes, that I have high respect for. So we're going to talk about their opinions. I'm going to share my opinion coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, going to answer the question, is Brandon Aiyuk putting Jayden Daniels in a compromised position? So we've kind of talked about the the story that is the Brandon Aiyuk Jayden Daniels relationship, right? As soon as Jayden Daniels was drafted by the Washington Commanders, I even came on this show. I was like, now all Washington's got to do is go trade for Brandon Aiyuk, because Brandon Aiyuk is in a contract dispute with the San Francisco 49ers, has basically said he wants a new deal. He wants to stay in San Francisco, but if they don't want to keep him, if they don't want to give him that new deal, he'd rather get traded somewhere else where they're going to give him his new deal. Just like every player in the NFL, he wants security. He doesn't want to come in on a 1-year situation. He's putting his body on the line. He ends up tearing an ACL or something like that. Now he's got to worry about his future. He wants to be compensated for the performance he's already proven in the NFL, proven to be one of the better wide receivers in the league. Certainly sees all the money that other guys like Justin Jefferson and those guys are getting, wants to cash in on a growing market as well. But a lot of what Brandon Aiyuk has done lately, especially since the draft has ended, has involved Jayden Daniels. That involves videos together, right? There was the FaceTime call where Brandon and Jayden were on FaceTime, and he's going, "Bro, the Niners said they don't want me," and all those things. There's Jayden Daniels attending a podcast recording. Brandon Aiyuk was the guest on the podcast. I don't remember the name of the podcast. It's Ryan Clark's podcast. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Sorry, but Brandon was a guest on the podcast. Jayden accompanied Brandon to the taping. He wasn't on the show as a guest, but then at one point, Brandon's like, "Hey, if they don't want me in San Francisco, there's a quarterback sitting right over here that I know I can do some damage with." Of course, talking about Jayden. So there's just been a lot of connection between Jayden and Brandon. They're friends. They're best friends, right? They're tied at the hip a lot. So the question really coming up now is Brandon Aiyuk wrong? And the latest example was Brandon Aiyuk going on TikTok, posting a picture or screen grab or whatever of Washington Commanders practice tape to his own TikTok. And of course, so I'll give you my initial reactions to that TikTok. I've had a lot of conversations with insiders about that TikTok. Actually, one of my insiders was the first person to show me that TikTok still frame. I don't have TikTok. I don't follow Brandon Aiyuk on any social media platforms, so I just didn't see it. But they sent it to me. My initial reaction to them, my initial reaction to everybody is, look, NFL players are friends, right? NFL players are friends all across the country, from being former teammates, from coming up in youth football together, whatever relationship they have. They're friends all over the place. And these guys, they vacation together, they live near each other, they talk to each other all the time. And NFL professionals will pick the brains of other NFL professionals constantly, right? The most popular and most well publicized version of this is tight end U, where literally tight ends from across the league get together and train together, and they mentor each other and they coach each other, right? So Travis Kelce is out there with Ben Sinnett, for example. And I don't know if Ben Sinnett was part of tight end U this year. I hope he was. It's a great opportunity. It's a great program. So I hope he took advantage of it. But Travis Kelce from the Kansas City Chiefs was out there with Ben Sinnett, and he's giving him pointers. Well, Travis Kelce has played for the Kansas City Chiefs his entire career. He's played for Andy Reid his entire career. He's played with Patrick Mahomes for a very successful chunk of his career. So what Travis Kelce is teaching Ben Sinnett, he may not be saying, "Hey, bro, in Kansas City, when we say Oski Oski, that means this for us." He's not necessarily doing that, but when he's teaching Ben Sinnett, "Hey, man, so when you see this kind of a look, or when your quarterback does this, or when your coach calls this type of a play, here's what I do, here's what you might want to do." He's giving him Kansas City Chiefs material, right? Like, that's Kansas City Chiefs knowledge coming from Travis Kelce to Washington Commanders tight end Ben Sinnett. So that part of it happens all the time. Don't even worry about that part. And practice tape and the OTAs, mandatory minicamp, also, it's very basic. It's formational. It's whatever. There's a lot of things that these things, and they're not going to hurt the Washington Commanders from a strategic standpoint. Let's just put it that way. So that part out of the picture, the next part of this conversation comes up is Brandon Aiyuk dragging Jayden Daniels into the mud for his own gain? And is he doing it at the damage of Jayden Daniels? And that's where the conversation took a turn recently on 106.7 The Fan in DC. Brian Mitchell, JP Finley do their very popular radio show. They were talking about, they brought Fred Smoot on. And obviously you got two former players in there, and JP Finley, who's got a very storied history in media, very smart dude. And those three basically agree that Brandon Aiyuk is essentially leveraging his friendship with Jayden Daniels to help him make money, which, the players were like, "Hey, we get it. Like, you want to leverage whatever you can to get paid. So we get it." But at the same time, if you're a friend of Jayden Daniels, you got to be careful of what you're doing. You don't want to pull him into the mud. You don't want to dirty him. You don't want to cause too much drama for him. And JP even mentioned, like, Jayden Daniels throughout the whole thing pretty much just kind of minds his own business when it came to, does he want to come to Washington or not? Does he not? Does he dislike it? Did he dislike the Top Golf stuff? JP pointed out. Everybody else was talking about it. Jayden basically kept his head down, didn't say nothing, just went about his business. Well, to me, Jayden is basically doing the same thing with the Brandon Aiyuk situation. Like, none of this is going on Jayden's Twitter. None of this is being posted on Jayden's TikTok, if he even has a TikTok. It's all on Braden or Brandon. And then the next part is Brandon being a good friend? Should Jayden take control of the friendship? Here's what I will say, because I'm not in the room with these two guys. I don't know their situation. And what I do like is that Brian Mitchell also pointed out that he has studied tape in his career with players from other teams, well, because you learn from other players. So again, just kind of supporting if you're worried about him showing tape or watch the tape of watching stuff with an opponent, a potential opponent down the road, honestly, don't be. It's not that big of a deal. But 2 points that the trio brought up. Jayden Daniels needing to take control of this friendship before Brandon Aiyuk does some damage to him or puts him in a situation that he doesn't want to be in. I would agree with that if I got the vibe that Brandon Aiyuk was basically doing this against Jayden Daniels' wishes. I don't think that's the relationship. Again, I think this is a very mutual relationship. These are two buddies, two best friends. I don't think Brandon is secretly taking shots of Jayden Daniels' playbook, going, ha, 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 sucker, I'm going to post him on TikTok. I think if that goes up on TikTok, Jayden goes, yeah, bro, I'm fine with that. Now, if that causes a problem, now to me, that's Jayden's problem to deal with. Now, you authorized it, you approved it, whatever, whatever. Now, again, I'm not in the room, so I'm not telling you that that's what's happening, but I just looking at people, looking at the way they interact with each other. This isn't like Jayden is just following Brandon around like a puppy dog in love, walking in his shadow. He's big bro, I'm little bro. I think it's a very mutual friendship. And if it's a mutual friendship, like I observe it to be, then Jayden is in control. So if Jayden gets put into a situation that he doesn't want to be in because of these interactions, it's going to be because he allowed himself to be. Now the next part of this, could Jahan Dotson have a problem with all of this talk? And here's what I will tell you from that situation. I don't know if Jahan Dotson has a problem with it, but I will tell you this as well. Jahan Dotson was in Oregon with Jayden Daniels, with Marcus Mariota, with several other players, De'Ami Brown among them. Cole Turner was out there. I think John Bates was out there as well, working out in Oregon together. So Jahan is on the field with his quarterback, working out however many days or however many times a day they're working out together. And then there's this isolated TikTok. I would certainly hope that Jahan Dotson has enough confidence in himself, belief in himself to not be worried about that. Now, also have the understanding that Brandon Aiyuk is one of the best receivers in the National Football League. So if Brandon Aiyuk were to come to Washington, he's probably number 1 or 2. Terry McLaurin's number 1 or 2. You can talk about them both being 1-1A and Jahan Dotson's 2, or Jahan Dotson is 3 because they're tied at 1. Whatever it is, Jahan's got to understand when it comes into it, you're not going to be the number 1 or the number 2 guy necessarily. You got to go out there and become the number 1 or number 2 guy. But at the same time, in the NFL, how many receivers do you usually see on the field? 3. So if you're Jahan Dotson, you're not really worried about that. If anybody's worried about the addition of Brandon Aiyuk eating into snaps and all those things, it should be De'Ami Brown, Luke McCaffrey, Dax Milne, Jamison Crowder, Olamide Zaccheaus, right? So on and so forth. It should be those guys, not Jahan Dotson. Jahan is going to be on the field. If Jahan gets open, Jayden's going to find him. Jayden Daniels didn't make his way through college football as successfully he was by only saying, well, I like you more as a friend than I like the other guy, so I'm gonna throw to you. No, you throw to the open receiver. So if Jahan is the open receiver, you throw to Jahan. If it's Brandon, then it's Brandon. If it's Terry, then it's Terry. That's a good problem to have. Now, could Jahan Dotson take it personally and be upset about it? Yes. I don't personally, and again, I only know him as through the scope that I know him. I don't feel like he's a guy that would take it to that heart to that extent, right? This isn't Jayden again coming out there being like, hey, Washington, bring in Brandon Aiyuk. I need a weapon. I have no weapons. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, he's just trying to make the team better. They're all trying to make the team better. So that's my 2 cents on it. Again, I'm not, their opinions, their views, their analysis. It is what it is. It's not, none of it is factual because none of us, Brian Mitchell, JP Finley, Fred Smoot, David Harris, none of us are in the room with those 2 guys. So it's just what we perceive, what we observe, what we think could happen. I think if it becomes a big deal that Jayden is involved in this as, guilty by association because his friends, I think it's going to be because the media, we make it a bigger deal than it has to be. Not saying that they're doing that because I don't think they are. I think what they're saying is they're worried about it becoming a bigger deal than it needs to be and Jayden then being wrapped up into it. But as long as we all keep the conversation from becoming a bigger deal than it needs to be, if it's just what it has been, I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. So we'll see. I don't think the story's over yet. So we'll see what happens, but we'll talk about that as it comes. Coming up tomorrow on the Locked On Commanders podcast, we will have Alex Akinbulu, Washington Commanders offensive tackle here, to talk about the new regime, the changes going on. Look, this is a guy with a lot of experience. He was here with Ron Rivera, Scott Turner, Ron Rivera, and Eric Bieniemy. Now he's here with Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury. So certainly want to get his opinion, his take, see what he's been doing. Also, let you get to know the other side of Alex Akinbulu in case you don't, a little bit more of a musical side to one of your Washington Commanders players. So that's coming up next on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Commanders. Make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, make sure you're also checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, first view today and every day. Every day, thank you for coming through as often as you do. Insiders, thank you for being insiders. If you want to get in on that program, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Text me today. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.